Hello, everyone. Will Gasper, Grief Support Counselor in the Cadillac office for Hospice in Michigan. Just wanted to give you a video recap of our group for Men Overcoming Loss on September 7th of earlier this month. So we started out with the premise that most people, especially men, feel a emptiness, or as some authors have put it, vacuity, which means emptiness and absence, a severe absence of something. So when we introduced that subject a couple weeks ago, the men, it hit them profoundly because they all could relate that after the funeral of their wives, after everyone has kind of gone their own way and gone back to their own lives, that there was a hole, there was a void, profound void in their house and in their relationships, a lot of different empty spaces they didn't anticipate, above and beyond the profound emptiness of their own house that they shared with their wives. Most guys related to it because that there was a lot of follow-up type of or secondary losses in their lives. A lot to do with relationships. The folks that they as a couple would hang around with and do things with were no longer available, or they didn't feel comfortable joining those folks that they'd hung out with before. So many people that they thought would be there for them were not there anymore. And it goes back to that old adage that a death will change your address book. Some folks that thought you could count on kind of disappeared. Folks that were kind of on the margin may have stepped up and filled that void somewhat as far as friendships and relationships go. One of the gentlemen talked about his identity as a caregiver. He felt that he was only a half a person now, since he was the caregiver for his wife for an extended period of time. And I know that many of you can relate to that if your wives were on the decline for any number of weeks, any number of months. And once that caregiving role has been taken away because of the death of your spouse, they questioned what their new role, what their new purpose in life was. Another gentleman commented that his role seems to be constantly adjusting. Although there is confusion and doubt and fear, it's a process of adjusting to what is presented at the time, what's presented that day, that hour. And they try to make their environment comfortable for themselves. As many men feel alone and isolated for so long, they're just having to reset their whole identity, their motivation for getting out of bed in the morning. A lot of gentlemen identified with the fact that they've learned new coping skills. each and every day. They learn something new about themselves, about their grief journey. And they all remember that adage, healing takes time. But healing also is kind of coexistent with working through the grief journey, whether that's a one-on-one, face-to-face with a counselor, a minister, a trusted friend, or perhaps a virtual support group, such as we do with every Tuesday and Tuesday, first and third Tuesday of every month in this Men Overcoming Loss group. You know, a lot of the folks that attended identified that with the statement that feeling the pain is indeed therapeutic. As counterintuitive as that sounds, feeling the pain is kind of like a self-imposed penance, if you will, that brings out the tears, that brings out all these emotions that many men try to stuff down. There are some women, of course, that would tend to do that, but mostly men seem to stuff those feelings and emotions down because society doesn't give us permission, or hasn't given us permission as men, to express those in appropriate ways. But it's getting better. The society's expectations, as we all know, is big boys don't cry, get over it, rub some mud on it. You know those sayings. Then we talked about the abrupt ending as prepared as many men thought they were for that day that their spouse would no longer be able to communicate, no longer be able to breathe. And the end is the end, physically, anyway. Of course, the spiritual relationship carries on, but that takes a while for most men to adjust to that physical loss of the being of the person they married, the person they fell in love with. So it was a very good discussion about how folks handled that day and the days that followed that day. No one chooses this change in their life, obviously, but how we cope with it and how we react to it is so very important for our stability, our ongoing purpose in life. And then another gentleman talked about the ability to separate the good advice from the bad advice. You know, those old sayings like, oh, she's in a better place. Isn't it a blessing that she's no longer suffering? Well, there are many, many well-intentioned folks that say these kind of things. Are they really helpful? And from the gentlemen that I've talked to and listened to, they are not helpful at all. They just want folks to be with them, hug them, call them, have a cup of coffee. Because the day of that abrupt ending, when their wives finally left this earth, it hit like a ton of bricks. They were not prepared for it. Confusion, was in like grief, bog of grief. They call that grief brain, by the way. Hit like a ton of bricks, and then appropriately, clarity would kind of evolve and emerge and give a little sanity to what just happened. Another man talked about he was afraid of not grieving because he didn't know what the new normal would look like, would feel like, but he knew grief and he knew how to handle grief, but he doesn't know how to handle that new normal. And when some of the gentlemen felt helpless, they would say the serenity prayer. And if in case you missed David Keller's presentation on that, he talked about how much wisdom there is in that serenity prayer, that many 12-step program participants say each and every meeting. God, give me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. So if all of us men who are going through those type of grief journeys right now can keep that simple prayer at the forefront of our being, and believing that we can heal, as Ron Grease always says, that will be a very good sign for eventual coping, as no one actually gets over a loss, such as the loss of spouse. But coping to accept the new normal, it's not all bad. And finally, one gentleman who lost his wife about 14 weeks ago, that the absence of presence compared to the presence of absence kind of made me think that those two are joined but the separate. So think about that, and we're going to have a new program, actually the first Tuesday of October, and I believe that is October 5th. So gentlemen, thank you for tuning in. Thank you for checking this out. Please tell your family and friends who might benefit from this Hospice of Michigan effort to touch and reach out to the men across the state who are grieving, who just need a good support group to kind of feel validated about their feelings, about where they're at in their own grief journeys. Thank you, gentlemen, and please take care. God bless.